So let me speak about law, but law connected very much to the economy, at least at the constitutional level. Theory of the constitutional field is a very ambitious name. It's really ambitious, but I will be using this notion of the field very relatively because actually we should write provisions and textbooks about field. So, what do we mean by the field or space in the constitutional law? That is the space for transactions, and this is about transactions that are legal or non-legal ones, and these are legal actions if they are registered in accordance with the legislation. So that's actually the symbolic space for social transactions that um, are in place between the actors of civil society, between the individuals and society, the state agents and the authorities or their officials. And these are the resources that could be either tangible or intangible. So that is all about interaction between the civil society and the state regarding the resources and also regarding the right to dispose of the resources, freedom of their disposal. This is what I mean by the constitutional field or the field for constitutional changes. What else should I tell about this? I've got quite an experience of generating undermining ideas regarding our constitution because back in my during my postgraduate studies I was invited as a white crow representing the civil society and representing the Helsinki group and then Kharkiv human rights group to participate in the development of the draft of the constitution that was about 1992. But then, when the constitution was already there, when it was enacted, I became the member of the official constitutional commissions, and today I'm also a member of the commission affiliates with the president of Ukraine for legislative judiciary reform, also including the reforms in the field of constitution. In retrospect, we may say that we were never satisfied with our own constitution, and the first major dissatisfaction came from President Kuchma. And you remember the referendum 2002 when he raised the issue as to whether you agree to approve the constitution through a referendum. Well, definitely that issue was refuted by the constitutional court. So he was dissatisfied with the constitution already back then. The other commission was the assembly of Mr. Yanukovych. I don't know whether you know this, but this constitutional assembly fully rewrote the constitution of Ukraine, and it was only the Maidan events and the beginning of the Revolution of Dignity that put an end to all this. I don't even know who's got the form attached. So anyway, I was the member of the commission and of the task force. Quite a narrow range of experts dealing with that, and we get a notice that 4 or 5 days later, the text will be published and it will be made known to the residents of Ukraine. This did not happen. But when uh, Mr. Yanukovych was no longer there, then uh, a new constitutional commission was established by Mr. Poroshenko, and it also started rewriting the constitution. And after Poroshenko's rule, Zelensky came and he established another commission also dealing, well, now it's frozen, it's not acting, but at the beginning it had several sessions dedicated to the continuation of the reform. So what I mean by all this is that the nobody, even in the authorities, is satisfied fully with our constitution. But what could we be satisfied with? Let me tell you about my vision of an effective constitutionalism. What would be the requirements for that? And the theory of constitutional field is actually the theory of the required components for creating effective institutions in any country within any space. There was one scientist who said that socialism is a stage in the development of a certain country which reaches a high level of prosperity. And then, if no capitalism comes to replace it, there is no need for constitutions. And the point that all the countries have constitutions does not yet mean that they realize why they have this constitution. Constitutions are effective only in the West or in the countries that have something to do with the Western civilization, like Japan. So I will be speaking about that constitutional. It's not about Islamic or Oriental constitutional, about Western one. So when we speak about transactions and about the interaction of civil society, the state, and the resources that they both have, we are talking not just about interaction, but about ongoing competition, because definitely the government wants to have as many authorities as possible. The civil society wants to have something private. So this competition is something normal. It's okay. And it is mediated through constitutional law. In this respect, when we mention that law and constitutional law is related to the rule of law, so we need to realize that law is like the rules of the game for poker. They do not tell what is good, what is evil. Good law only tells you how you're going to make an agreement and how you're going to determine what is good and what is bad. So, constitutional law is a long procedure, but it's not concerned with the outcomes and with what should be there at the entry point. We may have monarchy, we may have constitutional order, we may have a republic, but this constitutional law shows us how we reach certain decisions, desirably good ones, right ones. That's all about the rule of law, and the principle of the rule of law is embodied in the constitutional law. So that fight for the right decisions, if it's enshrined in the Constitution, um, is exactly the platform where national progress is taking place. The idea that constitutionalism should be related to progress is American by its origin, and it was Americans who considered that the Constitution is the guarantee of progress and success. And sometimes they said that it's all about self perfection of the nation, that the Constitution leads to. And to have a look at the list of components that lead to self perfection of the nation, um, this is definitely freedom, that shouldn't be complicated, because there are many definitions, thousands of definitions of liberty. In the Western type constitutional law, freedom stands for the right of a civil society actor or as a state actor, public actor, to take actions at his own discretion. That is freedom. Also, individualism. We can state that the Western constitutional law is based on individualism, and the US one is particularly focusing on individualism. And in spite of the whole rhetoric that we have in the Ukrainian version with this aftermath of socialism, the constitutional law has to do with individuals. And for constitutional law, in its good version, there is no society. It does not exist. It's like Margaret Thatcher said, there is no society. So, what comes next? Um, we have accelerated and facilitated social transactions. I've already mentioned transactions, but when the constitution is effective, it is supposed to facilitate all the social transactions that ever happen in this society. This is another important step. How can this be treated from the point of view of constitutionality or constitutionalism of the type I'm talking about? Of course, it's about the market, introduction of the market, and according to Hayek, it's when the market is more important than democracy. You remember probably that in his last papers at the end of his life, Hayek said that if there is a threat to democracy and market, you need to save the market because the democracy will somehow survive. So this acceleration and facilitation of transactions fits well into the theory of James Durkheim, economic constitutionalism. He was a mathematician and an economist, and from scratch he was trying to using mathematical models to write the new U.S. Constitution to check how far the Constitution created by the founding fathers corresponds to the current mathematical model if it were modeled through mathematical means. And it's of interest that his book has been translated, though into Russian, and I would really advise you to read his paper. So Buchanan said that when they were completing this work, it appeared that the constitution created mathematically using mathematical means was pretty much the same as the one established by the founding fathers. They didn't have the means, they didn't have the computers, they didn't have the mathematical models, but they did a genial thing using just their own intuition. And Buchanan stated that the Constitution is the Bible of the market. What else can be mentioned? So, acceleration and facilitation of the transactions presupposes that if you want to have a vacancy for your child in the kindergarten where foreign languages are taught, you can just pay for that. Because under socialism, normally you need to give calls and to have some nepotism relations, otherwise, you will not manage to do this. So, it's corrupt scheme. But in the market, well, there will be as many vacancies in expensive kindergartens as the demand is driving. And variativity is also important. By this notion, I mean that if we assume that constitutions aim to accelerate progress, so progress is all about the biographies of specific individuals. Because what is progress? We can say that there is some territory in which can be owned by officials. The variativity, well, according to the WHO, young people are considered to be people under 44. So before the age of 44, people accumulate resources through knowledge of language, through different practices, through traveling across the world when they are choosing the place to live. And suppose when I ask my students whether they're happy about the place where they reside, so normally they say that they would like to live in Frankivsk in Kiev. All the other cities are not considered. But when you ask students are asked, so they're thinking about the country where they would like to live in, because there are some who would even like to live in Ukraine. So that is a different vision. There is brave imagination of the Western type, and there is humble or modest imagination, actually lack of imagination of people in the post-totalitarian world. So variativity or variability is the multiplicity of these experiences. Before the age of 44, you have got many options for growth based on the Hegel's idea that everybody is fighting for recognition and for prestige because you want to have a career lift, career growth. So, if we view it through this prism, if we view constitutionalism from this point of view, well, I can see that 5 minutes left only, but I've just started. Okay, so this means that it's about modern marriages, multiplicity of modern marriages in different countries of the world. It may be that we have just one version of marriage, or there can be five versions. It's different about this variability. So the availability of the requirements that are either met or not met testifies to the availability of a real or fictitious, formal or informal constitutionalism. If you ensure this, then if you have this variability and accumulation of resources, this really matters. And what is even more important is the last requirement, consisting in the clear distinction between the symbolic space, which is imagination, freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, and subject matter space. If you really differentiate between two things, there are several versions for differentiation. There is the American version based on the First Amendment. There is also the Western European and Eastern European version. The Eastern European version, of course, is the worst one. The Western European is a little bit better because of the legislation of the EU. They have Article 13 of the Charter of the Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, but still, this is not such a good version as the US one. And the US one includes the prohibition for interfering into the symbolic space and to pass the laws which destroy freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of consciousness, and freedom of opinion. So here we may be talking for quite a lot, and if you are really interested in that, I would just advise you to have a look at this journal, which was published 5 years ago, the Critica journal, and my article is on the first pages. So if you're interested, please get this journal. It's of course available online as well, but access is paid to be paid for. So suppose I don't have any other time left to talk on transactions. I would only like to stress that there are a lot of stumbling blocks there. And when we identify the US as the founding fathers of constitutionalism and when we associate them with Western Europe, um, please don't forget that the US is actually the outcome of the quarrel between some parts of Europe because people left Europe and went abroad. And Rollo Emerson once mentioned that God forbid that we reproduce again, restore the Western European patterns of the world, because cool Americanism would disagree. It would not like to be European one. They would focus on their own values. In the constitutional law for Ukraine, that means that either we follow the European models that we're going to do, that we're striving to do, or we take the US version, which is far more risky. But I would say that it's several times more effective. Today, the US has 5 times more scientists and academicians than the whole Western Europe taken together. The US produces 80 to 90% of scientific breakthroughs and discoveries globally. The military budget is about 37% or 38% of the global military budget. And if we speak a bit about American culture, Krzysztof Zanussi, while analyzing the popularity of American movies, because 80 out of 100 stay in the memory of all the viewers throughout the world. But why are they so much influential? Because the models of American life, where individualism is accelerated and where a person is really free to pass the main decisions in his or her biography. So they come to be a temptation through those movies because the characters of American movies normally fix their problems independently, individually. So there are a lot of important things behind that that we could take into account in the constitutional law, or we don't do this. In 2007, I got an invitation from the administration of the president that was Yushchenko back then, and I was undergoing my studies in the US and in the UK. So I stayed for 6 years abroad in UK, US, and Canada. And 4 out of them, I was undergoing my studies. So the invitation was to write the model draft of the Constitution individually. Even my rector was not supposed to know about this. And it was not only me who got this task, several people got this assignment, and the salary for that would be about my salary for 5 years at the Department of Constitutional Law. So what I'm driving at is that please don't give to this temptation to think that those officials on top really know everything. No, they have strong doubts. They are very scared of what is happening. They don't know why we are so much ineffective, and they're trying to find some solutions to fix the problem. But for 20 years, we have been the first country in the world regarding mortality rate. We are the poorest country with the richest resources. We are a pearl, a diamond in the geographical sense for Europe, and we are in bad economic situation. So here I could talk for hours, but suppose you have any questions, I will be happy to take them. Thank you. It's a very simple question from me. You have started mentioning the beginning of the legal reform in Ukraine, and this is really about proclamation of independence. That there was a whole concept, but probably back then it was worse determining what legal system we would be building, the U.S. or the Roman Germanic one. Because you have mentioned the Kharkiv Human Rights Group, and I have also cooperated with it. And I remember we had a competition on human rights, and we invited Alexander Moroz, and he started telling the participants of the competition how the constitutions are written. And he interpreted Article 8 to be more specific. So in his variation, it was supposed to be like this. In Ukraine, the principle of the rule of law is acknowledged, but the principle of the rule of laws is valid. So in one of the constitutional commissions, I was seated close to Mr. Moroz. It was Mrs. Tajemniczuk who was the head of our commission, and side by side with Mr. Moroz, there was my seat. And I once dared say that market should be a priority. He responded instantaneously and said, Market? Market is a very suspicious notion. So I think that he was just a conventional Soviet type official. But as far as the idea and freedom of choice that Ukraine was facing back then, probably not all of you know that Mr. Yusko, who was the head of the task force in the first and in the second constitutional commissions, but they were developing the constitution of 1996. So he developed a model project of the US type. There was the vice president, president. So that was the American model, actually. And it was buried right away. He rejected this model, but the idea was brave enough. As far as the broader look is concerned, back then, almost all those developing models didn't have any real experience of staying in the West. They didn't live in the US or in Europe. They just knew it from Syria, from textbooks. So these were Marxists who were literate enough and knowledgeable enough as far as the classical Marx theories of the capitalism were about, and they had some doubts regarding socialism in favor of capitalism, and no more. That's just it. Well, I've written a lot of books which are dedicated to this issue. And if you scan the Constitution of Ukraine, the applicable one, so you will see that socialist ears are there, even in the first section of the general grounds. Just imagine the Western doctrine says that you cannot force people to do something that is not required by the law. The law is passed by MPs, and people are supposed to give feedback. If they don't like the law, they will not further vote for this deputy, for this MP. But in Ukrainian constitution, it's written they cannot be forced to something that is not envisaged by the legislation. So they actually haven't increased the level of binding force and directivity several hundreds times. Mr. Butkevich, deputy head of the Constitutional Commission, said that in Ukraine we have got about 400,000 bylaws. According to the standards of Western legal regulation, there should be 80% of dispositive regulations through freedom of choice, and only 20% should be imperative. With us, it's just vice versa 80% of imperative regulations and 20% of dispositive freedom of choice. So we are a totalitarian state in terms of the law. Any other questions? I'm from Zaporizhia National University. My name is Nadi, and my question is as follows. We've got the US and the European models of the Constitution. Can we write our own version of the Constitution? Well, that's what I've done. I have developed my own. Well, I'm still giving preference to the US model. That's why the constitution that I have drafted has been paid quite well for. But still, I keep going abroad for long periods of time, like half a year in Canada, 2 years in the UK, 2 years in the US. So I was trying to improve this constitution with time, and it was like every second year I was developing a new draft, and for European and US grants, we managed to publish those drafts in the Kharkiv Human Rights Group. Well, as far as the need for that is concerned, war was launched, but at the beginning of the wartime, the Security and Defense, National Defense and Security Council wanted to cooperate with me, but somehow after that, the work was suspended. But all professional Ukraine knows my draft constitution, knows some other draft constitutions, and I hope that they will get back to that. But to speak in more serious terms, I would like to say that Mr. Druzenko is now writing a lot about. That is one of my colleagues. Well, you know him. He established a hospital. He is a lawyer who studied in the US. He is also a constitutionalist. So I think that if Ukraine does not change its constitution for the Western type, Ukraine may disappear. The beginning of this war, well, you can probably market me, but before the war, several years before the war, I told at my department that if we continue to be such a sleeping beauty, we will just be torn away. Russians will take one part, Hungarians will take the other part, Polish people will take another part, because we are too attractive from the geographical and geopolitical sense. And we should do something. Otherwise, we will have other initiatives in the country and we will just be torn away and Ukraine will stop its existence. And all Ukrainian history is a proof to that. Sometimes in the Ukrainian Catholic University, we have a lot of closed conferences where we may hear very unfortunate facts from history, but that's a very serious issue. We are not rising. The gap between us and the other countries of the Warsaw Convention is on the rise. So, in absolute terms, we are rising, but in the relative terms, we are degrading, regardless of the war. Thank you. Thank you, Savalot.